Hello there, everybody. So here we are dealing with a subject that we've already covered on here, which is psychosis. Though this time I want to talk about it more within a wider framework as it pertains to culture. Often psychosis, like mythology, is not considered very maturely in Western culture. We seem to regard them as these unwanted guests that have no real place in the modern citadels that rational humanity erected. But I want to offer that this view is negligible of the fact that both of these subjects offer more insight into our humanity than we might first imagine. Because as funny as it might be to hear it put like this, I think that we can learn a lot more from things like psychosis if we step into the right frame of mind. And the problem for Western culture is that we're far too fond of trying to contain everything within the same frame of mind, which is to say whether it seems rational to us or not. And the problem with that is that we often miss out on potential insights that would be otherwise well within the grasp of our intelligence, were we to tolerate the more peculiar systems a bit more fairly before we started cordoning them off into the naughty corner of information, so to speak. My position is that all products of the mind, fully including things like art, can teach us something about how the mind works, a bit like how the wings of a bird can teach us something about aerodynamics. But in order to acquire those rewards, we need to regard them less as faulty equations that don't fit into rational systems, but more like X-rays that might reveal the dynamics of the systems that they relate to. A key area of interest for me is how the hallucinations of psychotic patients might hold the key to unlocking how the mind generates its internal imagery and narratives of life. So with all that now being said, I now want to say something about psychosis and how it ties into mythology and world building. The lack of vision as it pertains to psychosis also deforms our interpretation of mythology as well. Like I said in the last video about my definition on mythology, in some circles it's popular to consider myths as these archaic culture forms that don't really warrant any real significance to our modern lives. Myths are merely low-resolution explanations for natural phenomena invented by ignorant people who didn't have science. However, contrary to this view, creative systems like mythology are in fact dynamic, high-resolution systems that speak to a wide range of human interests all at once, because encoded in each myth, we see the embodiment of a particular history, a particular people's philosophy, their social attitudes, folk psychology, perhaps their political and religious concerns. And what's more, myths communicate the aesthetic identity of a people living within a particular period of time. Creative systems like myths are also of interest to psychologists and anthropologists, chiefly because they allow us to see into the collective dream life of a people, and like dreams, they can be interpreted as representing activity that lies below the threshold of consciousness. Now I want to close by saying how psychosis in mythology emerges from the same bed of life in the psyche. I made a video last year called Memoirs of My Nervous Illness, which is based off a book by the same name that was written by a German man called Daniel Schreiber. And in that video, we saw how these hallucinatory experiences of Daniel Schreiber became gradually converted into a new personal cosmology, and that this helped him to not only make sense of these unusual symptoms that he was experiencing, but also this awarded his life with a newfound sense of meaning and purpose. This is related to a process that's quite common to humans called narratization. Narratization is the process whereby dissociated parts of conscious experience are united by bonds of association, which the mind then tries to order into a sequenced narrative of events. We can notice this process in our own lives because we relate to our pasts not merely as raw data, but as a series of meaningful representations that we regale to others like a story. So through ordering clusters of information together like this, it helps us to organize our conscious life into a logical timeline that makes sense to us. This bridges into our sense of who we are, our identity, and what our place is in the world. And the way that I see it, cultural narratives like myths are a direct consequence of this process. Myths are an extension of natural processes in the psyche realized as cultural media. Myths codify information that was considered vitally important or meaningful to a people in some way, to their sense of nature, their sense of time, their social customs, their sense of shared identity, shared destiny even. And it distills them into an aesthetic narrative which relates all of that back to the psyche and tries to harmonize them. This mythic narrative commonly becomes united into the lives of a people through a traditional practice. And this rewards them with a sense of ordered clarity, of shared purpose, and existential meaning in a world of overwhelming complexities. Now, in times of crisis, such as in a psychotic meltdown, what we see is this narrative function working to reconcile the dilemma. Daniel Schraber's mind certainly went through a meltdown of sorts, but out of that also came a gradual restoration through a realization of this new personal cosmology, which acted as a compensation for the disintegrating effect that the psychosis had on the harmony of his consciousness. And I think what this reveals is fascinating, that no matter what, the mind will always work to maintain a consistent impression of world and self through the ordering effects of a representational narrative. And if there's no secure narrative to be found around it culturally, the psyche will simply form its own out of the jumbled cargo of one's personal information hoard. This demonstrates that what we call a mythology is a byproduct of this essential structuring process in the human psyche. And people who think that they've done away with mythology through aligning themselves with a rational sensibility are usually ignorant to the narrative ties that they are psychologically beholden to. There's a good quote from Jung that speaks to this in Volume 9 of the collective works, Archetypes in the Collective Unconscious. A man may be convinced in all good faith that he has no religious ideas, but no one can fall so far away from humanity that he no longer has any dominating representation collective. His very materialism, atheism, communism, socialism, liberalism, intellectualism, existentialism, or whatnot, testifies against his innocence. Somewhere or other, overtly or covertly, he is possessed by a supraordinate idea. The cultural landscape of all myth and symbolism derives from the activities of unconscious processes interacting with the creative, ordering faculties of the human mind. Psychological conditions like psychoses expose the interchange that bridges our appreciation of the sensory kingdoms to the inner life of psychic phenomena. Impressions that were once received as sense data now become energetic expressions within the nervous life of a living person, and these expressions can later find themselves encoded into new media such as art, music, or even a new mythology. But I think that the most important point to take from all this is that mythology and conditions like psychosis illustrate that none of us, no matter how sane or rational we think we might be, are alienated from the bonds of our own story. This inner locus that we return to, that which determines our historical identity and awards us with a semblance of ordered security, has arisen out of a communion between the contents of our life history, meeting with the fibres of our ancient unconscious nature. And in that silent space we call our own, we live out the myth that we call our lives. Thank you very much for watching, and as usual, I'll see you all again.